YouTube, how's it going? The Go Downs is back. So last Friday, we took a look at the NFL coaches who are on the hot seat already or potentially could be on the hot seat. It is early, but it seems to be a hot topic. Everyone's talking about, this guy should be shit canned, that guy should be shit canned. So we did that video last Friday, so I thought it was a good idea for this week here to make a video on the potential head coaching candidates for the upcoming offseason, so 2023. It is early. We got a list of guys, and I would be surprised if most of these guys aren't interviewed. I would be surprised. So I expect all of them to kind of be in that mix there. We'll break it down. Top candidates, some other candidates. And at the end, I kind of gave my way too early predictions on which jobs will be open and who kind of fits where, maybe most likely to get the head coaching job. So excited to break this down. We kind of are now leaving Friday open to videos like this, so something new every week that can kind of get all fan bases entertained here. So really excited about it moving forward. Full NFL coverage, scheduled content during the week, weekly picks, score predictions, power rankings, a lot more. So join us, like, subscribe, turn notifications on. We have picks leagues going on. If you're trying to join those, there is links pinned in the comments. Super Picks League, the best score of each week, gets to be featured with their picks in our upcoming weekly picks videos. So that's why it's not too late to join. Our sponsor this season is the GLD Shop, who, I'm rocking their Eagles chain right now, not by mistake. Talking about a couple Eagles assistant coaches in this video, but yeah, they have NFL pendants made from real gold, a bunch of jewelry, real gold, very affordable. We have a code GOAT for 33% off. There's a link for that and anything else you're looking for pinned in the comments. Also very important to follow that Twitter, live updates on there. Let's talk about the top candidates from the offensive background. So offensive assistant coaches, top candidates in my opinion. Start with the Eagles OC and Shane Steichen, who took over play calling duties for Sirianni, and since he's done that, it's worked out pretty good. And it is very early in the season, but Eagles are looking dominant right now, especially on offense. The play calling is great. They're, definitely deserve some credit for Jalen Hurts really stepping up. I mean, the improvement over the last year, game by game maybe, so that's a guy, and he was, with the Chargers in 2020, Herbert coming in there, so maybe get some credit for Herbert looking good, right off the bat, so maybe surprisingly to some. I think the problem with the Chargers that year was kind of just game management, clock management, maybe Anthony Lynn more responsible for that. So, Steichen could be a legit top tier, like the top of the top, especially from the offensive coaches, which we're talking about right now, for the candidates there. So that's a legit option. But let's see, how the Eagles season plays out. Maybe teams start to catch on, more film comes out, maybe more of a game plan, and maybe they get slowed down or figured out. They're looking so dominant right now that it's very hard to predict that to happen. But, we'll see. It's a legit option right now. Kellen Moore, even though it feels like, people, maybe Cowboys fans rip Kellen Moore a lot, I think that's pretty misleading if you kind of go off that. He's done a really good job. I mean, right now they have Cooper Rush in there. They lost a bunch of players to either the offseason or injury, and that is still a very solid offense. It's well called. It's a tough offense to stop, even though, again, they got Cooper Rush at quarterback. They're missing players, and for some reason I think people like to rip it. I don't know, and people don't see Kellen Moore, as a head coach, but he's doing a fantastic job. He had some interest last offseason. Maybe I think another one of those situations where when it looks like there's some coaching miscues, it seems to be head coaching duties, along those lines of, game management, clock management, things like that. So maybe it's more on McCarthy, but I think Kellen Moore at this early stage without Dak Prescott is doing a fantastic job. So he will definitely be very much so in the mix when it comes to interviews and maybe getting that head coaching job. Ben Johnson, one of those coaches on the younger side of the Lions, and look at the Lions offense. It is early. Things could turn around, of course. It's a kind of a way too early stage, but that Lions offense looks legit. And that's with Jared Goff. It's with a bunch of young guys, some new guys in there as well. Where they're at now, where they just were last year and the year before, it's pretty remarkable there. So Ben Johnson really turned it around, and again, the play calling looks great there. There is another team where there is some coaching, some bad moments from coaching, but I think that's really at the top. With Dan Campbell, we saw last week against the Vikings, kicking that field goal and calling that timeout. We saw moments like that last year too. So in my head, I'm already thinking of, do the Lions, let Ben Johnson out the door in the future, whether it's this upcoming year or the next year, and they maybe regret not making him their head coach. Not saying that will be the case. I can see that scenario. It's kind of in the back of my mind here. But, yeah, he's still pretty young, so maybe he doesn't get a head coaching job right away. But pretty impressive so far. And teams kind of looking for the younger guys these days too, so they're not really afraid to go with the younger guys. And the Bills OC and Ken Dorsey, former quarterbacks coach, so maybe he's owed some credit for the emergence of Josh Allen, where he's got to right now, possibly MVP caliber player, is an MVP caliber in the NFL right now. And arguably the best quarterback in the NFL at this moment. Debatable, obviously, but so he deserves some credit there. Last week they kind of slipped up against the Dolphins. Not really too worried about that at all. Before that, the play calling has looked fantastic. Some people worry about, Dayball. Without him, will the offense be affected? So far, it's early, but doesn't really look like it. So he definitely could, and he's had experience, playing in the league as well. So that's great. So it should be a top option there. A little bit more of a wild card, but I think could be a top candidate is the Dolphins offense coordinator Frank Smith. Obviously, Mike McDaniel calls the plays. He's kind of the guy, but people may be trying to feast kind of off that tree still. And Smith is a lot of good reports from him. Good people talk good about him, just players and people around the league from what I've read, what I've seen. So that's maybe a little bit more of a wild card option compared to the other ones, but I think it's a legit option there. So, not too many offensive top candidates compared to defense. We'll talk about defense right now, but the offensive ones up here are pretty damn good. Defense, a little bit longer of a list. Dan Quinn sits at the top. He's probably sitting at the top of the top, combining offense and defense. It sounded like he almost got a job last year. The Broncos were very, very much interested, and other teams were as well. But it almost felt like he was a little picky maybe. He wanted certain scenarios or team, or he was just going to go back with the Cowboys, and that kind of ended up being the case, which I think he would have taken the Broncos job. It actually felt like they were going to choose him. At first, it really felt like a lock. They won't hack it, maybe because the opportunity to get a quarterback like Aaron Rodgers, or they ended up with Russell Wilson there, so that could have been it. But I think Quinn could have had another job, but I don't think he wanted it. He kind of wanted to wait, go back to the Cowboys, work with that defense, and it looks like maybe the best in football right now. It's insane, and it's a well-called defense by Dan Quinn. And he had a good experience with the Falcons. They couldn't get over that hump, which was deep, obviously, in the run, but still a good option. It doesn't really feel like, because I don't really like going with the, what do you call it, like the recycled coaches. Like sometimes I call it playing musical coaches. Everyone's going back and forth between this guy failed that way. You're going to take him now. I don't like when teams do that. It really doesn't work out. Quinn doesn't really fall into that category. Even though he was fired in the past as a head coach. So he will most certainly get a job, and I'm pretty confident. We'll talk about the end on where I think he'll coach and maybe why he wanted to wait till this year. So a very good option. I would imagine he goes and head coach somewhere. Jonathan Gannon, the defense coordinator of the Eagles, he was interviewed by quite a few teams last offseason, and the Eagles defense is looking pretty stout so far this year. And they're changing things up, too. They got different style players in there, and they're mixing some different coverages in, maybe some blitzes in like they didn't do last year. So ability to kind of adapt and still run a solid defense. And it seems like he knows talent, too, because he's got to be part of picking out which players they're bringing in, and that's looked pretty good so far for the Eagles. So a legit options. Tamiko Ryan's the 49ers defense coordinator, one of the best defenses in football. Maybe was the very best down the stretch last year, especially in the playoffs. Look what it did. A young coach, got some interviews this past offseason, so that's fantastic. Leslie Frazier, who is a fantastic defensive coach from the Bills. The Bills always have a pretty stout defense. He was getting some interviews last offseason. The thing with him is he's kind of failed as a head coach before. Didn't work out in Minnesota. I'm thinking that's probably why he didn't get a head coaching job this past offseason. Has a shot to get it this upcoming offseason, but maybe teams rather have kind of somebody new, or if they're going to go for a guy with a repeat, it'd be a guy like Dan Quinn. Raheem Morse is kind of in the same boat, but a fantastic defensive coach for the LA Rams, obviously a big piece of that Super Bowl last year. Mike Caldwell maybe one to look out for the Jaguars, coming from the Buccaneers, Todd Bowles' tree, very good defense. That type of defense is taking over today's NFL, where you're mixing in a bit of everything, different coverages, blitzes. They're bringing in the right talent. The Jags do the same thing. I mean, he's got to be involved in the talent they brought in this past season. The rookies, especially, which look pretty damn good, and just given so many different looks. That's why it's very early, but it's a big reason why the Jaguars defense is looking pretty good at this early stage of this season, because it's just a difficult defense to kind of read, game plan with. Deal with pre-snap for quarterbacks, and looks like they understood how to find the right talent, like the versatile type players, which are kind of taking over today's NFL, the guys that don't just play one spot. So Caldwell, pretty good showing from him so far. And Ejiro Evero from the Broncos, Rams background, so that's fantastic there, obviously. And the Broncos looking pretty stout on defense already. So I'd imagine he gets some interviews as well. With his background and what he's doing already this year, if it keeps up, then he'll be in that conversation. And Patrick Graham, which the Raiders defense isn't looking so hot right away, right so far this early season. They don't have the right pieces though. So it's a little tricky. But Patrick Graham, who is a great defensive coach, was with the Giants. He got some interviews. The Vikings, he was pretty high up on the Vikings. It sounded like people thought the Vikings were going to hire Harbaugh. They went O'Connell. And then after the fact, it sounded like it was actually O'Connell, Patrick Graham, then Harbaugh, based on what I gathered. So that's interesting. Sounds like a pretty good leader there, Patrick Graham. So yeah, he could be back in the mix. Maybe it doesn't help. The Raiders defense is, as of right now, is a little underwhelming. But yeah, he ran a 3-4. That's his thing I'm thinking of. He ran a 3-4 with the Giants, so running more of a 4-3 with the Raiders. Maybe he's more, it shouldn't really affect that much, but maybe he's more suited for a specific type of defense. But he does feel like you kind of get that good leader vibes from him, so it's a potential option there. But you see a lot of defensive guys. It's weird because the top offensive guys, the list is smaller in my opinion from this video, but I think a lot of those guys have more of a shot than these guys, and we'll talk a little bit more on which guys I think have the best shot in the end and where they could fit. But some more candidates. Thomas Brown, who's the Rams assistant head coach, also coaches the tight ends. He got some interviews last year. It helps. He's assistant coach of the Super Bowl winning LA Rams. But yeah, you feel like other guys may have more experience and they may get more benefits from those guys. But Joe Lombardi, the Chargers offensive coordinator, which is kind of like back and forth on that, because the Chargers offense can be so explosive, but there's some times where they're a little underwhelming. So I think he calls a pretty good offense, but it's a decent option there. Byron Leftwich, who I don't think he gets a job, but since there was a lot of, and his name spelled wrong, I apologize for that, but there was a lot of teams that interviewed him last year, but I don't know if he was like a top tier target still. So Bucs offense a little disappointing so far, but played some really tough defenses so far this early stage, and have had some injuries and Mike Evans suspension. Don Martindale was a great defense coordinator with the Ravens. He goes to the Giants. Looks like the Ravens are missing him. Looks like the Giants are loving him. So that's a good option. I don't know if I see him as a head coach. Not that I don't think he can lead a team. He definitely gives me those vibes. I just see him sticking as a defensive coordinator. It is kind of a defense that's certain. That's why the Ravens moved on from him. It's a good defense. It's a tough one to deal with, but the best of the best, like the top teams, could really game plan for it and kind of expose it. You're kind of limited to, man coverage, a lot of blitzing, specifics that eventually, as the year goes on, kind of gets figured out, even though he is a good defensive coordinator. Lou Anarumo, the Bengals defense coordinator. Bengals defense was very, very well coached in their Super Bowl run, where they came up with just a little bit short there. So a very good defensive mind here. I thought there would be more interest last offseason, so maybe not likely this offseason. Brian Flores, Steelers linebacker coach, obviously a very good defensive coach. The problem with Flores is the Dolphins look better without him right now, even though I still think he's a good coach, and maybe a little bit I don't know, I'm not saying there is or isn't, but maybe the question of will there be a distraction because what went on this offseason. And Gerard Mayo, the Patriots linebacker coach, drew some interest last offseason. Texans, so he could be back in the mix. A linebacker coach, though, so there's a little interesting. And Josh McCown, who drew some interest from the Texans, and it just kept feeling like the Texans wanted him, and they almost had to talk themselves out of it or maybe they're going to wait until he. It almost felt like they're going to wait for, maybe they'll hire him at the end or this next offseason, but it's a little weird because why didn't they hire him in the past? They felt like he wasn't ready. But does that make sense when it comes to coaches? How do you go get ready? You just get a year older, so a little interesting. And Sean Payton, question mark. And I guess you could put other guys that were fired last year. Vic Fangio maybe would be the only one top of my head. But Sean Payton, everyone talks about all the time. Is he going to come back? Is he going to come back to the Saints? Is he going to come back coaching another team? We'll see. He just retired. So if he decides he wants to come back after a year, and he's not going back to the Saints, that just tells me he just wanted to get the hell out of New Orleans. He didn't really want to retire. If he doesn't come back, then he just really felt like retiring. And if he comes back to the Saints, then that tells me he missed it, and he sees the Saints could use him right now, maybe. So there's different scenarios there. We'll see what happens. But yeah, this is definitely just kind of just for fun here. This is pretty much for fun because it's way, way too early. We always do these types of predictions in the offseason. But I took the five. I had 5 teams that are most likely going to be needing a new coach. In my opinion, it could be more, could be less. There's always a big surprise. And I took the 5 candidates I think are most likely to get the jobs and where they fit. So Seattle. I think Pete Carroll could retire, or they could agree that maybe we'll move on. And Dan Quinn, who was a big-time defense coordinator for the Seattle Seahawks, goes there. And that could make sense that maybe he didn't, maybe he would have taken the Broncos job, I think, but why who ended up with Russell Wilson, but why he'd rather just go back. Maybe he thought this was an option. Maybe he heard something. Maybe he knew something there. And the Seahawks have some pretty good draft capital for Dan Quinn and company to work with, so it could be a pretty appealing job as well, and he could be the very top candidate. Colts went with Kellen Moore. There's nothing that really leads me to anyone for the Colts. I think they'll be looking for a young, good offensive mind that, evenly, pass, run game. So I thought Kellen Moore made some sense there. Do they go defensive coach? People could argue either way. Do they go because Reich was an offensive guy? I still think Reich's a solid coach, but I think this could be it. And I still think they can win a division. They'd probably be my pick today still at this way too early stage, but maybe he keeps the job. But it could be an opening. Definitely could see it. And I just felt like Kellen Moore. And Shane Steichen went with the Texans. The Texans, I think, if they move on from Lovie Smith, I think they would go offense, and it could be a bridge coach like they did. The Texans did last year. Lovey's doing a really good job of the defense right now, but that could have been it. And they could have brought Lovey back with some of the defensive pieces they added and helped coach them up and maybe use him a little bit, and then add that offensive guy because they have very good draft capital, and either to work with Davis Mills because he needs working with, or, which I think is a very realistic possibility still, is to draft a quarterback very early because it's a very good class. You want to get one of the top guys, so they get that offensive guy who deserves a little bit of credit for Justin Herbert and more than a little bit for Jalen Hurts. It makes sense, and he's really good at mixing up the play calls, which the Texans probably want to get some more run going as well. So I thought Steichen of the Texans made some sense there. And then the Panthers was back and forth with it. I thought Steichen for the Panthers. I thought Kellen Moore for the Panthers. I thought Jonathan Gannon for the Panthers. I ended up going Ken Dorsey, who was actually there at his first stage of his career as a assistant coach, scout, and then a quarterbacks coach as well. But quarterbacks coach with the Buffalo Bills, and then deserves some credit for Josh Allen, obviously, and now the offensive coordinator for the Buffalo Bills, which deserves some credit right now too. But the Panthers, they're probably just fed up at this point. Like, we got to figure out this damn quarterback situation. The coaching also isn't good. We're likely to move on from our coaching staff. It's kind of the situation with the Panthers. So go get a guy that you know works with the quarterbacks well, but they could be interested in some of the other offensive guys. So they're maybe more likely offensive for that reason. I think the Texans, if they move from Lovie Smith, it wouldn't make sense to go defense right away. Even though they were interested in Jonathan Gannon last offseason, they didn't pick him though. So I think the Texans also, if they needed a coach, they would go offense. Panthers offense. Colts, I can see either way. Seahawks, I think they'd be all in on Dan Quinn. If they don't get Dan Quinn, I can see either, but they may want to get back on track with defense. They might be a believer on that there, so they could go defense. Maybe Jonathan Gannon if they didn't get Quinn. But then the Commanders, I was left with Jonathan Gannon. This is one you can argue either way. They can go offense or defense. I think maybe the fans would argue not going defense because they currently have a defensive coach. I mean, the two biggest names on their coaching staff are Ron Rivera and Jack Del Rio, who are supposed to, and they were genius defensive minds, like legendary people in the NFL world on defense. And it hasn't worked out, but yeah, I think it's just more so it's just kind of old school is not working anymore, and they need that defense is actually supposed to be really, really good, and it's actually really, really bad. So now it's pretty far off where it's supposed to be at. So maybe they're trying to get back on track. Gannon did a great job with the Eagles last year, but they realized where they need to change some things. They need to add more flavor, really more uniqueness to that defense. And what does he do? He goes out, adds talent, and then he adjusts his defense to fit that talent, and it's still good. There's no drop off. It's even better. It feels like we're only in week 4, but so that kind of makes sense. It kind of made sense as a fit, but they could go offense. They could be interested in, some of those offense guys we talked about. Ben Johnson from the Lions was a guy I actually had up here. So he's kind of that next man up. Like I thought he definitely get a job. He's a little younger, so maybe that's why it takes another year. So he's kind of that 6th guy for me. But yeah, the Gannon reasonings I had made it make sense for the Commanders. But I feel really good about the Dan Quinn Seahawks one for sure. But these are just way, just kind of for fun. Where do they fit? Who do I think could be open? What jobs could be open? So that's kind of the reason for it. It is a little ridiculous, like going on predictions like this will happen. Right now, it's really not what we're doing. So it's a little fun exercise here. And we talked about coaches in a different way with the hot seat last Friday. So today, this Friday with this. So again, kind of leaving Friday open to something new. Everyone keeps telling me to bring back the rookie power ranking. So I guess we'll end up bringing that back. I haven't decided what day of the week, but want a little more season to get going here to be able to evaluate how the rookies are playing fully, but sometime soon. So we got all kinds of NFL content here. So if you can join us for that, like, subscribe, turn notifications on, be much, much appreciated. Check us out on Twitter. There's a link down below. Very important to follow that. And there's a lot of other useful, important links pinned in the comments as well. So check it out. But that is going to do it for this one. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.